Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Today is the Commission's public forum on our draft decision for Gippsland Water. My name is Sitesh Bojani, and I'm one of the Commissioners of the Essential Services Commission. Just to let you know, this forum is being recorded to ensure access for those unable to attend with us today. Any statement, comment, or question you make will be included in the recording, which we plan to make available on our website. To start, I acknowledge the traditional owners of all the lands, wherever you are for today's forum. For me, I'm speaking from the lands of the Ngunnawal people, and I wish to acknowledge them as traditional owners. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land of the service area of Gippsland Water, the Gunai Kurnai and Bummerong peoples. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I extend that respect to Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be here today. Thank you all for making the time to come together this afternoon for this forum. I will make some specific introductions, and I'd like to start by introducing some staff from the Commission. We have our Executive Director of Price Monitoring and Regulation, Marcus Fudden. Hi, Marcus. Our Senior Regulatory Manager, Dean Wickington. Dean. And other members of the water team at the Commission, including Lucy, Edward, and Shauna. From Gippsland Water, I would like to say good afternoon and welcome to Sarah Cumming, the Managing Director. Hi, Sarah. Many thanks, Sarah, for making the time to be with us. We're also delighted to have some board members and other staff of Gippsland Water with us today as well. Welcome and thank you all for making the time to be with us as well. As I said, thanks to all of you for making the time to join us today. Before we get going with the agenda, some quick housekeeping. If you have any questions or comments while someone is talking, please type them into the chat so that they can be shared and build on these as part of the conversation. Would you also please keep your microphones muted when you're not speaking so that we can avoid feedback and background noise. In addition to your participation today, you can also provide written feedback via the Engage Victoria website. Please do let us know if there is another preferred option for how you would like us to engage with you, as we're always open to feedback and changing our ways of engaging. The web address for Engage Victoria will be in one of the slides that we're about to start sharing with you as we go down into the presentations. Can I start by saying I'll use the first part of the forum to give you a brief introduction on our role in price regulation. But as always, the main purpose for this event is to hear from you and answer any questions you might have on our draft decision. To help shape today's discussions, we'll cover how we assessed the price submission and reached our draft decision. Then Gippsland Water will have an opportunity to respond to our draft decision, and then we'll have the opportunity to hear from you through questions and comments. We appreciate very much being able to have an open and honest conversation with all of you today. These engagements from a Commission perspective are valuable, and insights from them help us shape our decisions. So, a little bit about the Commission. We regulate Victoria's energy, water and transport sectors and oversee the Fair Go rate system. We also administer the Victorian Energy Upgrades Program. We have been regulating water prices for more than 20 years, including for Gippsland Water. For the water sector, We approve prices and service standards, monitor and report on performance, and customer service standards, or service codes, more accurately. New water prices to apply from the 1st of July 2023 for 14 water businesses. The prices we approve reflect an assessment of the efficient costs water businesses need to recover to provide valued services to consumers. Following consultation, we will issue a determination that sets out the maximum prices that Gippsland Water may charge customers. So to step us through how we assessed the price submission and reached our draft decision, may I invite Dean Wickington to present on behalf of the Commission.
Thanks, Satish. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks again for coming along today. As Satish mentioned, I'll just step through a high-level overview of how we assess the price submission from Gippsland Water and our draft decision itself. As a price regulator, in terms of what we do, I think it's first important to note that we do have to, in our decisions and processes, abide by a set of rules when we assess price submissions, and for us, that's set out in something called the Water Industry Regulatory Order. So that has a number of things that we need to consider when we're assessing a price submission from a water business. What we do to give action to those in terms of a price review is release something called guidance, and we give that to water businesses in advance of when they lodge their price submissions, to set out things like our expectations about engagement, process things, but also the information that we need in order to assess the submission. Just an important change we put in place in 2018, we introduced something called the Primo framework, and that does have some incentives in place that we put in place to try and ensure that water businesses, I guess, primarily are engaging well with their customer base, to make sure they've got a good understanding of customer concerns and priorities when they're shaping their submissions, and look to see how they've been taken into account by the water business in terms of what it puts forward. The other thing we do, there's other acts like the Water Industry Act and also our umbrella act, the Essential Services Commission Act, that also guide our price review process, but that we give action to those kind of things in the guidance that we issue water businesses. Thanks, Ed. Next slide. It's a propose respond model that we have. So a business puts forward a proposal to us and we assess it. There is an onus on Gippsland Water to propose prices and services that are consistent with the Water Industry Regulatory Order and also our guidance and relevant legislation. The purpose of our draft decision is to give an indicative or preliminary view about what we propose to approve or not approve. And that's an important part of the process. So it gives stakeholders another opportunity, including Gippsland Water and others, to have their say before we move to a final decision and price determination, which will apply, as Satish said, from the 1st of July. Thanks, Ed. So that just backing on what I've just run through, we put out the draft decision for Gippsland Water in early March, and we're taking submissions on that until the 28th of April, and we'll make a final decision by June that will specify the determination itself, will specify the maximum prices that the business can charge from the 1st of July. And under the business's proposal, that'll be for a 5-year period, taking us through to 2028. Thanks. Next slide. In terms of what we do in a price review, here's a high-level summary, but looking at engagement, as I said earlier, just before, and how Gippsland Water has used the feedback. So how's that taken on board what it's heard? Testing the expenditure and demand forecast. So as Satish mentioned earlier, a big focus what we do is around efficiency. So those forecast costs really are probably the key driver of prices. So we do spend a bit of time making sure that what the business has given us on that front is robust, and we get help to do that through consultants. We've used one this time as well. Verifying the supporting assumptions and data. So there are a lot of assumptions that go into things like input cost, demand forecast. So we test the reasonableness of those through our price review process as well. Evaluating how businesses like Gippsland Water have managed risk and also its performance. So one of the features of the Primo framework is looking back and say how as a business has gone in the current period in terms of delivering on its commitments to its customers, and also around its cost benchmarks, which I'll touch on a bit later. I think I've already mentioned OPEX and CAPEX. So OPEX is the key driver of prices, really. We have to make sure that they are reasonable, as well as the capital expenditure plans of water businesses. Thanks, Ed. Next slide. Summary of draft decision. So we've generally accepted what Gippsland Water's put forward, and I'll touch on some of the elements of the price submission shortly. But it was we've got 14 businesses in the current price review, and we've issued a number of draft decisions so far. Gippsland Water was one of the first 4 we put out, and we do have a process in place through this review where we can streamline a review process for a business, and we were able to put out Gippsland Water's draft decision a bit earlier than most other businesses due to the quality of its submission. I think the overall value proposition that it put forward. So we're proposing to accept the regulatory period, essentially all the operating and capital expenditure put forward by the business, the guaranteed service level scheme put forward by the business, and the tariff structures and the form of price control, which largely unchanged through the period. We did have a small adjustment to the revenue requirement. Just, I think it's basically rounding. It was due to mainly a small issue around capital expenditure in 22-23, but outside of that, that was all quite straightforward. We did ask the business to review its approach to tax obligations in our decision. I know the business is looking at that at the moment. Thanks, Ed. Yep, so this just gives an overview of what Gippsland Water proposed for the 5-year period coming up in terms of operating and capital expenditure. Haven't proposed any adjustments on the back of those. Next slide. Thanks, Ed. Forecast OPEX. I think one of the things that stood out to us with Gippsland Water, that what we've seen across the sector over the past few years is rising cost pressures. So things like chemicals, input costs, and things like that have gone up. If you're comparing Gippsland Water to a number of the other businesses, its cost control on OPEX in the current period was quite strong in a relative sense. It basically managed to the regulatory benchmarks in the current period, which is important because that sets the basis for future cost assessments. So one of the key features of the proposal that stacked up for us, and why one of the reasons we're happy to get it out quite sooner than some others, was around its good cost control. You can see going forward in terms of costs overall, they sort of move a bit here and there, but they're essentially flat, and operating costs per customer go down quite a bit for the business. It's probably, can't remember exactly, but I suspect it's one of the better outcomes across the sector in terms of that kind of measure of efficiency. So that's a good element. Next slide, thanks. Like most businesses, we're seeing a bit of a pickup in capital expenditure to address things like compliance and also servicing future growth and responding to things like climate change. The profile there put forward by Gippsland Water is probably a bit more modest compared to some of the other businesses, and that needs to be remembered. That's being delivered while the business is delivering real price reductions, so that's a good outcome. Thanks, Ed. Next slide. What's it mean? So I guess in terms of bills, what we're seeing is this is the Gippsland Water's proposal. So we are seeing a cut to bills in real terms. So these figures on here are pre-inflation being added. So they're in current day terms. So I think a reduction in 23-24 of about just 6% or so in the first year flows through to customer bills, which puts it, I think, as one of the highest in the sector in terms of proposed reductions coming through. Similar reductions across residential and non-residential customers too. Thanks. Next slide. So I mentioned this thing called Primo a bit earlier. I think that we have seen a really good shift within the business around how it's gone about things. I think in 2018, it was rated as standard under Primo. So advanced under Primo is a step change in that. And that what we're looking for, a business putting forward an advanced submission, is that it's offering better value to its customers. And what we've seen is that there's been a lot of work going into controlling costs, managing risks for customers so they're paying not more than they need to, delivering real price reductions while at the same time focusing on some service improvements like the way the business engages and communicates with its customers. So for us, the value proposition does stack up, and it went through a really good engagement process to understand what customers value most and demonstrated how it's taking those into account. I've mentioned the OPEX benchmarks before, which is a good sign of cost control. One of the other things we look for in this is that it's okay to claim increases in expenditure, but what sits behind that in terms of justification is very important to us. So we were given comfortable, the business was able to give to us, and also our supporting consultants to test that what it put forward stacked up from, in terms of the major projects it wants to deliver. Firstly, that they were needed either to meet customer service standards or to respond to policy or regulatory obligations, and also the costs underpinning those were robust as well. One of the other things in the submission, a couple of businesses did this quite well. I think Gippsland Water is one of it. High inflation environment, in our framework, inflation is passed through into customer bills. So inflation's 7% or thereabouts. So that number will get added to those real bills. What the business has done is drop those real numbers early, passing price reductions through early in the period to help mitigate that impact for customers. And we've seen a couple of businesses do that well. Accepting risk. So the business has done a lot of work around its revenue that it gets from different customers to make sure that households and other commercial residents aren't paying more than they need to. Thanks, Ed. Next slide. I think that might be the end of mine. I think we've got a transition here to the Gippsland Water team. Thank you. Thanks all.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Dean. I'd like to now invite Sarah Cumming to represent Gippsland Water's response to the Commission's draft decision.
Thank you, Satish, and thank you, Dean, for that introduction. We're really proud and pleased to be here today to present our response to the Essential Services Commission's draft decision. And thank you to my team for their help in preparing this. We'd firstly also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the Gippsland Water area, the Gunai-Kurnai people and the Bunurong people, and we recognise their strong cultural connection to the land and waterways. We pay our respects to elders past, present and future. So for Gippsland Water, we've gone along quite a strong customer-led journey. Our customers have shaped this submission really strongly. There's much stronger customer outcomes in the document we submitted, higher levels of service across the board, and greater accountability to what we're spending customers' money on. We're proposing, as you've heard, a tariff reduction, and we're really proud that it's one of the biggest in the sector, and particularly in the regions. I think that's where particularly cost of living, pressures are being felt. And one of the things we've spent really the last 5 years on is reducing our controllable operating expenditure per connection. And that's something we're committing to in this next 5 years as well. And that's something we're particularly proud of. That has meant we've got this ongoing commitment to a reduction in our cost to serve for customers. And the reason that's particularly important is in an environment of escalating costs, particularly things like chemicals and energy costs, where we're a big user of both, and the costs are going up over inflation levels. To be able to deliver that lowering cost of service, something we're particularly proud of. And we also structured our submission very deliberately around the risk we were going to take on and not passing any unnecessary risk onto our customers in the form of additional costs in their bills. And that's something where, we actually went to the effort of being able to understand that per dollar per customer bill, and it comes out at around that $60 mark per customer. I think in the past we might have been a bit more risk adverse, and some of those risks may have flowed through to the customer bill. Next slide, please. So the service area for Gippsland Water is quite extensive. It goes from the sort of the southeast of Melbourne, from the Druin, Warrigal area, right through to Merbau North, up into the hills in Rawson, sort of Erica, Kungalla, Glenmaggie area, and also out to Briargalong. So that's sort of our furthest east. We've got some coastal coverage there, and yeah, it's quite an extensive area. It can take our staff over 4 hours to travel from end to end if they need to. So quite a large coverage area, and we also cover 4 local government areas. So all in all, we have an extensive network, including 2 ocean outfalls, 14 wastewater treatment plants, including the Gippsland Water Factory, which is in essence a massive wastewater factory with the capacity to produce water, 15 water treatment plants, 1,700 kilometres of sewer mains, and 199 sewer pump stations, and then more than 2,000 kilometres of water mains. So it's an extensive network that services 73,000 drinking water customers, 65,000 sewerage customers, as well as significant industrial customers. And we have some of the largest industrial consumers of water and producers of waste in the state. Next slide. As an organisation, we're really strong on our vision, and particularly its focus on providing a healthy and sustainable, contributing to a healthy and sustainable Gippsland area, and that we have that focus on multiple generations, and that's something we've taken into account in how we've been approaching our price submission. It's not just a 5-year outlook, but we've been able to model to the 10, to the 15 and to the 20, and look at how it is that we continue to provide stable or falling prices despite a number of large structural sorts of changes in our local region. We're strong in our values around safety and wellbeing, our customer focus, innovation, accountability, collaboration and integrity and respect. And I think particularly in this project, we've taken it as one to actually focus in on our accountability, and also our collaboration across the organisation. And we've actually been grateful to be part of a project, a process that's actually multi-year, that's brought our organisation together to a single end. And I think we've benefited from that. Next slide. So I won't labour too heavily on this, but it is available on our website. But it is a pictorial of our customer engagement journey and how we've gone through from the very early stages of it, just asking customers very open questions about what they're concerned about, what they'd like us to focus on, to then really tailored and deliberate consultative and deliberative forums. So for us, it's been a really rewarding engagement process. It's taken many different forms. The key for us, though, is that 3,500 of our customers directly had input into this process, and that's of a scale we've never done before. So the challenges I started to touch on before is our region in particular is going through significant structural economic change, and has been for probably 8 years now. And so we consider it a major economic transition with the closure of power stations, partial closure of Opal. We've had a closure of Saputo, and previously we've had Hazelwood's closure, and also Energy Bricks, who are a huge customer of ours. And then layering on that, we've got the cost of living pressures, as everyone's very aware of. But locally, we also have some of the highest levels of social and financial disadvantage in the state. So the focus on trying to keep our bills as affordable as possible really needs to be viewed with that lens. That's certainly how the board and the organisation has taken this challenge. The predominant theme, which isn't surprising from our customer and community engagement, was around affordability and fairness. And that's just reflective of reality of our particular region. There was a good awareness amongst the customer base also about our exposure to major customer revenue and ensuring that there isn't a cross subsidy. And finally, global and sector challenges, which I mentioned before, but particularly chemical prices are one of those big things. And now just labour force expectations are starting to play a challenging role as well. Next slide. Thank you. So at a glance, the original submission proposed a $91 bill decrease before inflation. Our hope there is that the quantum of a decrease will substantially offset the inflation that customers will see flow through to the bill. So comparatively, they should be seeing a far smaller overall increase than they will on any other utility bill. Almost all of our tariffs and charges will decrease. Our residential tenants are now starting to get close to paying some of the lowest water bills in the state. And given the hardship that we've got, that becomes a really important and significant outcome. We've got significant infrastructure investment, and that includes up to $10 million for energy projects. And that'll help us meet some long-term strategic aims. We've got around 2025, we are 100% renewable energy. In 2030, we're net zero emissions, and we're quite a big emitter. So these investments, are really helping contribute to meeting those aspirations. We've included significant community support projects, a lot more public drinking fountains. It's something that the community is really getting behind. This initiative we started about 4 years ago, and also some relatively small but significant customer experience improvements. So we haven't opted for things like digital meters in any significant way in this particular pricing period, but there's some money sort of towards the late part of the pricing period. But instead, we'll develop an app where customers can directly put in their usage and estimate how their bill, what their bill will be. Also, they can make payments, they can put instalments, and we tested that with our customers as part of the engagement, and that was really well supported. We've got website improvements, and we've also got a live outage tracker as well. We've committed to faster response times to sewer blockages, and quite a significant investment around education and awareness, water conservation, sustainability, wellbeing, and customer hardship support. Now, that was a theme that came through really strongly in every element of the engagement we did. Every customer I spoke to personally ended up saying, we'd like to see more of this from you, Gippsland Water. So that was something we're actually quite excited about, and we've never really put a lot of emphasis on. So you'll see quite a big change there. There is more customer care resources being added to our customer support area, and that's a reflection of the demands of the cost of living pressures, and employing and upskilling more staff. Finally, we're particularly proud of the genuine and considerable Aboriginal employment focus we've placed in this submission, and also our engagement with traditional owners and First Nations people. It's been a great process, I think, for both of us, and we've actually embedded some flexibility actually going forward based on the feedback we got from those organisations about what things we could try to do. We know we won't get this perfect, but we've sort of got this allocation to be able to actually have some flexible responses and work together on initiatives. So that's something we're really looking forward to doing. Next slide. So I'm very brief, and you've heard this already from Dean, but obviously we're really pleased that the ESC has, in the draft decision, rated us as advanced under the Primo framework and considered the submission to be of a high quality, and also acknowledged that we're committed to delivering outcomes that reflect those customer priorities, and particularly our focus on the pathways for Aboriginal people. So our response. So after taking all of the feedback into account, we'll be proposing a residential customers will actually save $79.63. That will be the bill decrease before inflation on average. That's down from $91.30 that was in the original submission, and I'll take you through why later on. Residential tenants will save a further $21.40, non-residential customers $118, and property investors $58. So I'll get you into a bit of detail about those shifts shortly. So there was a range of areas for us to respond. Capital expenditure, recovery of a shared asset cost through new customer contributions, population projections, so customer connections, clarifying how we've structured our customer promises and measures, some expenditure revenue and pricing assumptions, and also treatment of income tax. And I'll go through those each in more detail. So firstly, the forecast capital expenditure. Look, overall, I'll let everyone just read this particular slide rather than read it for you. But the net result of the change that we'll be responding with will give customers an additional $5.09 bill decrease over the 5 years. And we've accepted the Essential Services draft decision on this. Next slide. So this one's also sort of quite a technical sort of bit of feedback, but overall, again, we'll adopt the recovery of the 2022 shared assets expenditure via the NCC methodology. For those who are in the sector, you'll understand that. And it just has a slight customer benefit of impact of 0.88 cents on a bill decrease. So these are just some fine-tuning elements about capital and how to allocate. So the next one, the VIF is a Victorian in the future government estimates on population growth. In our submission, we had actually taken VIF and then done our own analysis with a consultant looking specifically at our region in a lot more detail, right down to talking to developers about what development is likely to go ahead when. And so we'd actually adopted a higher growth forecast than VIF at the time had suggested. And part of that was because in the past we've been really quite conservative around population growth. And we look back in the past 10 years, I think we ended up on average having growth 30% higher than what we'd estimated. So we're really conscious of that. And that can result in customers paying for things that they really shouldn't, sort of a little out of sequence. So we did that analysis, and then subsequently Victoria in the Future 2022 has been released. And those updated estimates are quite closely aligned to what we had in the original submission. So we're proposing not to change our growth and connections assumptions. We have seen some sort of stalling in growth just at the moment, but we think that's actually a blip. It's that acute timing of interest rates and cost of living pressures, and we saw this, and also closures, and we saw this happen with Hazelwood when it closed. We had this short contraction in our local economy, and then things just took off. So we were loath to suddenly react to what we think will be probably a little blip in connections in the current year, and we didn't want to transpose that into the future years. So our submission will be very closely aligned to VIF 2022. So we just needed to clarify our customer promise measures. The way we'd worded our measures really didn't hit the mark. So we've gone back to some common language there, and we've reworked all of those measures and reworded them. So that way they'll be clearly measurable, unambiguous, and easy for customers to understand. So some of the things that have happened since we put in our price submission just a couple of months ago, and I mentioned these earlier, is we've had the closure of Saputo in Maffra. It's quite a significant customer for us, not one of our major industrials, but a decent sized customer. And we've also had the partial closure of Opal Maryvale, which often would be known to people as Australian Paper, or Maryvale Mill is quite a common sort of historical name. Both of these were quite significant, a significant amount of revenue. With the Opal closure, we have been able to also have some significant reduction in operating costs because there's far less waste being treated, but there's a lot of lost revenue on the water sales side. And with the closure of Saputo and Mafra, we've lost a significant amount of revenue and had very little operational savings, unfortunately. So we have put those two closures and adjusted figures through our model, and it means on the bill the Saputo impact is around the $8.33 and the Opal $8.51. So in the figure I started out with at $78 or so, that includes these two quite major adjustments. And then income tax. So we had feedback from the submission from the Commission around our treatment of income tax, and we were proposing to adopt that feedback. But then, as we reran some financial figures, we've realised that our tax paying position has actually been pushed out of this pricing period altogether, and so we won't be in a tax paying position at least until year one of the following pricing period. And it's our hope that there is a pending decision on that from the tax office as well. That means that may not happen for a significant period after that, but that's an unknown at the moment. But at least for us, there is no income tax projected to be paid in this period. So that's a really good outcome. So no customer impact on that one. And so now I'd like to hand over to questions and discussion.
Thank you. And so we'll go to Satish.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah. I think it's probably a good time to open the discussion and hear some views from outside the Commission on anything that's been raised or on any other topics or concerns that anyone may have. And that would be great to hear from everyone that's here today. If you'd like to express a view, we'd be delighted to hear it. Can I just give a reminder as we go into this session, this part of the session, the forum is being recorded. This means that any statement or comment you make or question you ask will be included in the recording. Any questions you ask using the chat functions will be read through along with your name and will be also included in the recording. And for any verbal comments, please use the raise your hand function and you'll be invited to unmute your microphone, turn on your camera, say your name and organisation. If you're calling in via telephone, please say your name and location prior to speaking. And please feel free to raise your hand and unmute yourself now as you see fit. From our purposes, we find it very useful to hear directly from you about what you think. So without further ado, are there any other questions are there any questions that anyone would like to start off with? You could probably stop sharing yep, that's great. Thanks, Ed. Focus on the people now rather than the slides. If there's anyone that would like to start up, and whilst perhaps if people are still thinking through what's been presented and so forth, can I just make the other observation that I think Sarah and the team at Gippsland Water are familiar with, which is that we've actually received a couple of Facebook comments in response to our draft decision. And I also just wanted to very briefly invite Sarah or anyone from the Gippsland Water team that wanted to if you wanted to put forward any response to those Facebook comments or to make any comments in relation to those Facebook comments, this may be an appropriate time should you wish to do so.
Thanks, Satish. There was a comment around, I'm just trying to find it here. a comment around desalination water and customers paying for that. Haven't got the exact wording here at the moment, but it's a really good question, because it's probably something that a lot of members of the public aren't clear about, who pays for desalinated water and who doesn't. But from a Gippsland Water perspective, historically the only time we've paid desalination prices for water is when we had over a number of years, had a short-term contract with the Melbourne retailers, because we had a shortfall of water to service our Druin and Warrigal area. And so fortunately they agreed to sell us water when we needed it. And when we did take up that offer, we paid the equivalent desal price. But it should be noted that overall that was really beneficial for us, because we were never charged any of the other costs that normally, if we'd held water in that system, such as the type of overhead prices that costs that Melbourne Water charges, they were never passed on to us. So even on the moments that we've actually paid desal prices, we haven't really paid the full amount, and it was only as we used the water. So that contract's in place until the 30th of June this year, and from July 1 we'll actually have a permanent entitlement into the Melbourne system, and that's one of the top 10 projects in this submission. What that means is we now hold permanent water in the Melbourne system. We're still not paying desalination prices as such, but in the future, as further augmentations of the system come on, it's quite possible eventually, whether it's in the next 10 years or 20 years, that those sorts of implications will come through to our customer base. There's a process at the moment being run by the state government called the South Central Reforms, and that's working out how future augmentations, say future desal plants being built, how would those costs be shared? What would be a fair and reasonable way for regionals who have a very small portion of that pool of water to share that cost? So that's a process being undergone at the moment. The cost of buying the water into Tarago and all the holding costs associated with it are all factored through in this price submission, though. So it's a long answer with sort of a no desal charges, really.
Thank you. Thanks for clarifying that, Sarah. I think that's probably important, as you say, an important point for members of the community to be familiar with, and may not readily be appreciated by everyone. So thank you for that. Any questions anyone would like, or comments or issues anyone would like to raise or make? If not, can I perhaps also, because it's, I mean, obviously this is a public forum, there are opportunities for further submissions and issues for people to raise, and we'll certainly come to those in a moment, and to perhaps to assist in that process from our perspective. Can I just urge everyone here today to have a think? If you're thinking of making submissions, in addition to whatever you may be wanting to say, we'd be delighted to get feedback on what you think of our draft decision on the prices proposed by Gippsland Water. You may want to comment on the overall bills of, or the proposed changes to the fixed and variable charges or prices for tenants, owners and non-residential customers. You may want to comment on the proposed new customer contributions that Sarah mentioned, also known as developer charges. What do you think of our draft decision on Gippsland Water's performance and their future service commitments? As part of the price submission, you may recall each water business has presented their performance and posted a set of outcomes that customers will receive during the 2023 to the 2028 period. To find out more about those outcomes and how they'll affect you, you can see Chapter 3 of our draft decision in relation to Gippsland Water. Again, we'd love to get any feedback or any comments or issues you'd like to have in relation to those matters. And of course, if there's anything else you think we should consider before making a final price review decision for Gippsland Water, we would be very pleased to receive that. Now, I'm not sure if any of that provokes any questions at this particular forum, but obviously, yet again, a call for any and an opportunity to provide any comments that you'd like to. I think we may have one in the chat. Let me just bear with me a moment. There you go. Ian McDougall, firstly, well done, Sarah and team. When do you think customer engagement portal will be available?
I think the portal's in the next 12 months. I might defer to one of my team members if she's well enough, Melissa,
Yeah.
she's COVID affected.
It is.
Is-
Hi, Ian. And yes, it is in the first 12 months of the pricing submission, and we are very much looking forward to delivering that and hopefully co-designing that with some of our customers from our customer sounding board. So yeah, we can't wait to get that off the ground starting 1 July.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you, Ian, as well, for typing that into the chat. Anything else anyone would like to raise, whether it be through the chat or just feel free to raise your hand and ask the question as well if you'd prefer. If not, everybody is content and satisfied with the information and the advice that's been given at the presentation today. I might then take this opportunity to finalise matters and thank you all for joining us today. It has been valuable for us to gain the feedback from Sarah and the team. We look forward to any other submissions through the Engage Victoria website. You can see on the slide there, the website address is engage.vic.gov.au/water price review 2023. Between now and the 28th of April, which is when submissions close, again, encourage you and your teams to liaise with Marcus, Dean and the Commission's water team. They're available to field any questions you may have. On behalf of the Commission and Commission staff, I'd like to extend my sincere thanks to all of you for joining us today. I know the water team is looking forward to continuing to get your feedback. Finally, if there is one final opportunity for questions, but if there's nothing coming, nobody else needs to raise any other issues, can I take this opportunity to wish everyone a safe and happy Easter long weekend. Thank you all. I now close the meeting. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tish.